Um, let's go ahead and get started just for sake of time and respect people's schedules here. I'm going to, where am I here? Excel. I'm going to share my screen, and I've got two spreadsheets. This main one you should see is entitled 2006 to 2022 absentee votes. And to give you a little bit of history, a little bit of context about where this data comes from. First off, it comes all from the North Carolina State Board of Elections. They have a public data file website that you can access the files in. I would, unless you're working with a statistical package like SPSS or SAS or R, I would be very hesitant to try and data crunch on your own, anything like in Excel, because these data files tend to be so large that it will literally crash the program. So I do everything in SPSS and then drop it into Excel. But what this first file that I sent around does, the 06 to 22 absentee votes, it basically takes the return status for each ballot that is an absentee ballot. And an absentee ballot can be a mail ballot or what we typically have called a one-stop, which is really in-person voting. You will also see in some years some different categories. For example, in the '06 data, there's a column F, that says requests by relative. Others will have fax or email columns. Anything that's not a one-stop is basically a mailed ballot of some kind. And what I did was break it down by the voter party code. So what that means is whatever party registration the voter is, Democrat, Republican, unaffiliated, I broke those out by parties, and you will see at the bottom the total that gives you the complete universe. So within the ballot return status, you'll see a number of boxes: canceled, conflict, duplicate. Those are all the codes that the counties use when a ballot is returned back to them, either by mail or in person. And in general, the one that you want to focus on is the box that is typically labeled either OK, or in future years, it will be known as accepted, or accepted but cured by curing. Those are official ballots that have been counted and have gone through the process and have no issues with them. You will see some other categories, some ballots, no votes. Some ballots were rejected. Some were returned undeliverable. Signatures, either signature was different or signature missing or signed by other, or a ballot that is spoiled. A spoiled ballot typically is when somebody marks two boxes in the same office. So say, for example, this fall, if somebody's voting for president and they mark both Donald Trump and Joe Biden, there's no way to determine what that ballot indicates. And so oftentimes that will be a category that falls under spoiled. You'll see for Democrats, for Republicans, for unaffiliateds, as you go through the various worksheets, you will also find the other parties represented as well. So this is the pure information, just to give some context as to how many ballots, early ballots, were sent in, and we can parse out the mailed versus the one stop. If you go to the most recent election, 2022, you'll see Democrat, Green Party, Libertarian, Republican, and then unaffiliated, and all of the numbers underneath each of the categories as well. So this is just kind of the raw data. that those of us who study this and those of us that work with this kind of information, this is kind of the big picture of what we're seeing. Any general questions that I can answer on this file, the '06 to 2022 absentee votes?
I have a question. So is the unit of analysis the ballot or the voter?
It it could be one and the same. It's these are ballots.
Okay, so like if someone had something like returned undeliverable, um, does that mean that they didn't cast a ballot or not? Or did they cure that or cast it at a one stop later on?
Yeah, that's a great question. So these are ballots, but
Okay.
that does not necessarily mean if the ballot falls underneath one of those non-accepted or non-accepted cured, that doesn't mean that the voter did not vote. That is a
Okay.
separate voter file. And I'll get into that with the next spreadsheet. But this is basically just ballots in terms of accepted versus not accepted. Any other questions? Great question. Thank you.
So the signature different. I thought we didn't do signature matching until recently. There's a pilot program.
Right. So I have to go back to the state board and see exactly what that entails, that category. But you would you would have to sign the
Mhm.
ballot, the mail-in ballot, when you returned it.
Right?
The question then, though, is before that requirement kicked in, what were they using to make that determination? And that's one thing I just have to find out from the folks in Raleigh.
Yeah, because I get it if it's not signed, but unless they have your, original signature from when you first registered or whatever, I don't know. Because they weren't requiring in 2006, they weren't requiring a copy of an ID with it either.
Right. And that copy of the ID just went into effect.
Right.
So the signature different may be somebody other than the voter
Ah,
that signed the mail-in ballot.
okay.
But I'll need to confirm that with
Yeah.
Pat. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be easy to determine.
Yes. Yes.
Usually.
Yes. All right. Any other questions? All right. So the second file, let me go to the beginning here, is from 2012 to 2022. And this is a combination of the voter registration data for this particular election year, combined with a second file that the state board puts out, which is called the voter history file. And there is a unique North Carolina identification number for every voter, meaning that when you register to vote, you get a permanent, what is called NCID number attached to your registration. If you move from one county to another county, your NCID number stays the same, even though your county voter registration number may change. So it's kind of what we would call a permanent key that we can use to identify voters along with their voter history data. And all the voter history data entails is the NCID, the election that they voted in, the vote method. Sometimes the voter party code is included, but it's a very limited field. It does not give any voters votes. There is nothing attached to determine how a voter may have voted. You may have heard in the news, I think it was just this week, with the second primary, the State Board of Elections had to take down the precinct returns because in some precincts, there were so few voters that cast a ballot that you could determine who voted for which candidate in that regard. So they're having to work around a system by which to exclude the second primary that we had just recently to make sure that the secret ballots are indeed secret. But with this data, combining the voter registration data with the voter history data, I can then make these calculations based on, if we go to 2012, everybody who voted absentee by mail, absentee one stop, curbside for election day, in person is election day, and then provisional and transfer ballots. Sometimes you will see this singular absentee in some years. I think that's just a coding issue at a particular county. I really haven't investigated as deeply as I probably should, but they are so few in numbers that what I did was basically lump those 10 absentee ballots into absentee by mail. It won't make any statistical difference. It'll just be a 0.000 something percent of those total numbers. But what I did then was to take the percentages. So within the absentee by mail ballot, 28% of those came from registered Democrats, 22% came from registered unaffiliated, 49% from registered Republicans. And then basically did that for each of the four major categories: by mail, absentee in person, election day, and then provisional and transfer. The first row shows you registered but did not vote. So these are all the voters within the various party registrations who did not cast a ballot in 2012. Same thing done here in the second area by race and ethnicity. So white, non-Hispanic, Black, African American, non-Hispanic, Hispanic, Latino, and then all other races, unknown and unreported. Same basic dynamic. You can see then the percentages in terms of how for each vote method, various racial ethnic groups did participated in that particular vote method.
Can I pause you? I think the share screen, we're still looking at the, I think the first screen.
I'm sorry. Okay.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt.
No. Let me restart here. I thought I was sharing everything on Microsoft Excel, but maybe not.
I think it gets picky like that, where it's just going to share that one.
Yeah.
Yes, that's different. Thank you.
Okay, so everybody is seeing now 2012 to 2022. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. My apology. So again, just kind of repeat. These are the various vote methods: absentee, absentee by mail, one stop, curbside. These are all the vote methods that we can pair with a registered voter to see how they voted in 2012. This usually the first line is registered but did not vote. So these are all the 2 million North Carolinians in 2012 who were registered, did not vote, broken down by party registration. And then, as I was saying, this area over here is probably the more helpful one for each election, gives the percentage breakdown by vote method. So again, in 2012, the absentee by mail, 28% registered Democrats, 22 unaffiliated, 49 Republican. Two other, and then this is down here, these are all by the various race, ethnicity categories. Okay, and again, the percentage is over here. Two other lines that I include in each one. This first one, party registration, distribution of cast ballots. So overall, these are all the voters and the percentage of the party registration for all voters who participated in 2012. And then just to give you a comparison, for the total voter pool, this gives that same information. So you'll see in the voter pool for 2012, 43% were registered Democrats, but in the election of the ballots cast, 44% came from registered Democrats, a slight increase. You'll notice 26% were registered unaffiliated. Only 23% were from unaffiliateds casting ballots. Republicans at 31%, but they cast a third of the ballots cast. And then this final column, column O, I'll do this for every one, but this is basically just the percentage breakdown. So in 2012, 5% of the ballots came by mail, 56% came by absentee in-person early votes, 38% on election day, 1% provisional transfer. Any general questions as to the structure of these spreadsheets? Okay, so you've got each worksheet 2014, 16, 18, 20, and 22. And then I start here with this worksheet vote methods 2012 to 2022. This just gives the overall big picture. And you can see how in each election, presidential midterm, how the ballots were cast using the different vote methods. So I include at the bottom the total number of ballots cast just to give folks a sense as to the raw numbers. But then in 2012, 56% came through absentee in-person. You'll notice in presidential years, the number has gone up considerably. And again, thinking about mail-in ballots, it is typically 3 to 5% a year comes in the form of absentee by mail, with the exception, as we all remember, of 2020 and the pandemic. This was unheard of. 1 million ballots came by mail in North Carolina, and that has never been seen before in terms of the dynamic of that vote method. It went back down in 2022's midterm. My suspicion, hypothesis, it'll go back to the range of 3 to 5% mail-in for 2024. We'll just have to see what the final numbers portend. But in presidential years, we can pretty much count on average, if we're taking 2016 and 2020, at least 2/3 of the ballots will come before Election Day. Any general questions on that dynamic?
Just interesting that the early voting in 2020 was the same as 2016.
Yeah, I think I have to go back and I can actually do this. I would be curious as to that increase from 4% to 18% of mail-in. How did folks, if they voted in 2016, what was their vote method compared to 2020? I think the big shift was that absentee by mail dynamic, but I'd be just curious if it was probably more election day voters from 2016 or absentee in-person voters in 2016 going by mail in 2020.
Yeah, absentee in person is early vote, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's what I was saying. It's interesting at that.
Yeah.
They still, I guess they figured there was more space between you when you voted early, so health is more, less risk of getting COVID.
there's that, but with so many more North Carolinians voting early, I've actually switched to voting on election day because I can literally just walk in, get my ballot, walk out. I've noticed on early voting, there tends to be lines. So it's a weird human behavior dynamic that we're still trying to completely understand in that regard. I think for this group, the next worksheet is kind of going to be the one of interest. And this is the breakdown by party registration. And I think we can see two noticeable trends occur. Up to 2016, it tended to be plurality registered Republicans utilizing absentee by mail voting. After 2016, in 18, 20, and 22, that plurality switched to registered Democrats. And for those of us who have been tracking this, we've known about this for some time, but that dynamic certainly has become much more pronounced. And I think the drop from 2018, 27% registered Republicans down to 21, and then 2022, only 19%, that has some influences by external forces at play in that dynamic. Any general questions or observations on this one? Okay. Just to give you the comparisons, this next worksheet, absentee in person, this is what some people call early voting, even though absentee by mail is also an early vote method. This shows kind of the dynamics again over the past decade in terms of the various elections and how things have, honestly, in my opinion, kind of balanced out between the two political parties. In 2012, it was almost half of the early votes came by registered Democrats. Now we're kind of almost at a balance. In 2020, it was 35-35 with 29% from unaffiliateds. The shift then has been among Election Day as well, kind of in the reverse, to where now more registered Republicans tend to show up on Election Day versus registered Democrats or registered unaffiliated voters. Any general questions I can answer on any of these charts?
This might be just like a more work for you to do comment, but like, what are the raw numbers look like? Because it could, I mean, the sheer number of voters participating in these things might not, at least how I was seeing those percentages, or they were percentages of Democrats, or were they percentages of the total absentee
These are
group?
these are percentages of the vote method group. So these percentages that I've got on the screen now, these are all the voters who cast ballots on Election Day.
Okay.
Now we can break out it as you're asking, we can break out and I can do graphs of these raw numbers. It would take me a little to kind of build in and add in, for example, absentee curbside, absentee one stop. These are all the same thing. They're absentee person early votes. I can build some charts that have the raw numbers if that would be helpful to the group.
I don't know if we have anything that it necessarily, but I see that those numbers are right here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was also thinking about where were those voters coming from, that additional 15% that moved into the mail-in voting in 2020. Could also just be new voters or people who aren't really voting. Like, it could be like the influx of people coming into the electorate might be interested in mail-in voting. Like, these are the non-habitual, but like will vote in the presidential election people.
No.
I don't know, but could be responsible for some of this movement. It's not like they're just coming from Election Day voting. It's not like the Election Day voters just moved into another category. It could be that there's a new group in general, like the number, we know that turnout in general was a lot higher here. So there's, like 2 million more people that are in that column that you were just not seeing.
Yeah, if you would write me the questions And I'll see what I can slice and dice out of that. I think what I can do is go back into 2020's data file and bring in folks' voter history from 2016 and 2018 and see the consistency or where folks switched to vote by mail from in previous elections. I think that's what you're asking.
Yeah, sorry, I was a little like not fully
No, 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 no.
digested thought, but I don't know if it's like, I'm thinking about like the calculus of voting, like how easy or hard is it to vote? Maybe the people who are on the edge of voting, who are like, I don't want to go to the polling place at all, but I also am not like a habitual voter, might come into the electorate if there's, more of an emphasis on mail-in voting, right? Like,
I agree completely. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yeah. If you'll send me those kinds of questions, I'm happy to try and figure it out. We can bounce ideas back and forth. Yeah.
awesome.
All right.
It's also pretty distressing to see the fall off in the non-presidential years, just in the totals at the bottom. Like we lose 2 million voters.
Welcome to midterm elections.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just it is what it is, as we say in political science, but the patterns are just consistent in that regard. So
Yeah, there's like the theory though, if you make things more accessible, maybe you can get some of these people to like get over that hurdle a little bit easier.
yeah.
So I know our committee has had discussions about like the drop boxes or the permanent voter or absentee voter list. Like we've talked about these things, like maybe something like that might encourage, this other group of people. Like if we were to identify that like 15% of these mail-in voters are people who generally don't vote, that might be like an interesting takeaway of like the ease of voting in North Carolina.
Yeah. That'd be a great question to ask. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions from folks? What I want to move next to is the electorate by race and ethnicity. And so this worksheet, electorate R-E 2012 to 2022, this gives you again the total ballots cast and the race ethnic breakdowns of all of those ballots cast. So fairly consistent in terms of our racial ethnicity composition of our electorates, although there are some changes. I think notably the percentage of voters who are Black, African American, non-Hispanic has been decreasing. The white non-Hispanic has been fairly consistent. The one thing that I would point out is the light blue bars of all other races, but more importantly, the unknown unreported. This is something that Chris Cooper and I have been watching very carefully within the voter registration data file. And that is voters basically not giving any indication of their race or ethnicity, just either leaving it blank or choosing not to select one or both boxes. And that number as a percentage of the registered voters has been increasing over the past several years. And I think we will continue to see that number, particularly of the unknown, unreported, rise significantly within the data that we have. So just something that we who analyze all this information are going to have to kind of either try and work around or just acknowledge and put it out there and say we're not sure how to deal with this. But this should,
Michael, is multiracial a box they can check or not?
yes. So the all other races include Asian American, American Indian, multiracial, Hawaiian, Native Hawaiian / Pacific Islander, and
Yep.
then a box, all other races. But multiracial is included in that.
Yeah, I think that would be interesting to compare that to the state's demographics. Because more and more people on the census are identifying as, more than two races or more than one race. Yep.
Yep. Yep. Okay. Then I break it out by each of the major voting methods. So this next worksheet, ABMs, this is absentee by mail vote method by race ethnicity. Generally tends to be much more white than the voter pool as a whole. You did see a spike up, and I'm curious as to why. I don't have an answer for this. In 2014, 20% of them came from Black African American voters, but generally it tends to hover around 10 to maybe 15% over time. For comparison, the absentee in person, the early voters, again, gives kind of the numbers. We've seen a decline in the percentage of the ballots coming from Black African American voters, but fairly consistent, kind of bouncing around between 65 to 70%, 72% in 2022. On election day, again, same kind of trends for each election, that vote method on election day, the race ethnicity breakdown, and then also among the provisional transfer ballots, that race and ethnicity breakdown as well. So with that, I can stop sharing. And what kind of questions might folks have?
It'd be interesting to see how the racial demographics compare to the overall demographics of those who are registered.
Okay.
Proportionally, do white people vote in a higher proportion than they are of the electorate, or is it the same?
Let me go back to sharing here. So if we go into the 2022 spreadsheet, the worksheet,
Mhm.
notice here when I'm breaking down by race, ethnicity, the registered voter pool, race, ethnic distribution,
Yep.
64% white, but of those casting all ballots,
Hmm.
73%. Black African Americans made up 20% of the voter pool, but were 17% of the ballots cast, and so forth and so on.
Look at you. You had the answer. Thank you.
Anytime. And that's for each year. So if you go into each worksheet, you'll find that data at the bottom.
Has that, do you know just offhand what the trend is there? Or has it been about the same?
The trend usually holds about the same in presidential years, but midterms, it can be much more fluctuating, typically much more white in midterm years than in presidential years. But generally, what I've noticed is since 2012, the Black African American percentage has been slowly decreasing in comparison to what I call their political weight. So if you think of the voter registration percentage as their political weight, if they met that political weight, they would be equal to what they were in the pool. Black voters tend to have a slightly smaller percentage, so their political weight is decreased. White voters tend to have a higher percentage than their voter pool registration, so they're punching up from their political weight. George, any questions?
Yeah, Dr. Bitzer, just one on the military absentee by mail. Is that tracked at all? As I know it's a relatively small sample size, but is that tracked as a separate category?
I need to dig into, and that would be part of what is sometimes called the overseas ballots. I need to dig in and try and figure out if that is necessarily tracked. I think I can get at it, but it may take me some time to kind of get through and maybe consult with the State Board of Elections to see if they track it. I know within a separate file for that first spreadsheet, I think it is tracked if it's an overseas ballot, but I need to go back in and confirm that and double check it.
Yeah, again, I know it's a small subset in the grander scheme of things, and all this phenomenal work that you've done is just really eye-opening. But I think that would just be something that I think we would want to be able to answer that question at
Okay.
the end of the day.
Okay. I think what I can do, there may be, if it's not readily there, there may be a back end way, because most military folks are registered in certain counties. So, for example, Fort Liberty would be in Cumberland County. And the base, and I don't know why. Oh, I remember why. I looked up within Cumberland County, and I think the base is covered by 2 precincts. I may be wrong on this, but I think it's covered by 2 precincts. If I find those precincts within the early votes cast, I could then probably code them as most likely military, depending on the address or the receipt from overseas, if that's identified.
Yeah, maybe just because the reading I did on the overseas voting, I mean, it may just be that overseas category may be sufficient just to understand that as part of the broader voting population, rather than going exclusively military, because there's a whole heck of a lot of folks, as you well know,
Yes.
from the state of North Carolina that are working in embassies overseas or just in business overseas, and so that would be interesting to know.
I've made myself a note. I will
Thank
try. Slice
Thank
it.
you.
Any other general questions from folks? And again, I'll send out these 2 spreadsheets to the full committee again, just so that everybody's got them. But they can watch this video to kind of get the explanation for. All right. And I know I got an email from Shawnee, let's see, earlier this morning, just to kind of after the presentation, then all of us discussing this data. So any general takeaways from what y'all have seen out of this?
I mean, this is good data. I mean, I guess, I don't know, maybe this is like our I feel like we don't have a lot of the committee members here, but I guess some of the like deeper questions that our group is sort of struggling with is like how important is mail-in voting to like a healthy voting system? Like, what is the role? Is it a role that like everyone should have easy access to mail-in voting, or is it that mail-in voting is like only kind of like in certain dire circumstances? And I think that's sort of and who needs mail-in ballots and why. And I think those are like the deeper questions, and this helps get at like who is using the mail-in ballot, who are doing these things. And so, I mean, they're deeper questions that I think like we've been struggling with as a group in terms of thinking of our recommendations. Like, some of us have different ideas about what the role of voting should be and or mail-in voting should be.
Okay.
And I think we struggle. I don't want to say who, or, you know, I'll let other people speak for themselves, but some people think it should be like, you know, this is a plan B and it should remain a plan B, and plan A should be in-person voting because plan B has more risks associated with it. Whereas there's other group members who think that, no, this is like voting, people should have more choices and it should be easier. And there shouldn't be any like gatekeeping on who can and can't vote. So that's, we've had, I think our group has had a lot of like, we've had good discussions, good thoughtful discussions, but I think we're still kind of at we're having difficulty come up with recommendations.
Okay.
And this data helps us, at least gives us more to think about.
There's one other factor, and I'm willing to do the data crunching on this. I can also break this down by generational cohorts, so age categories.
Mm.
If there's a set age distribution that you want over each election, or if you want it done by generational cohorts. So the greatest silent generations and the boomer generation, Gen X, millennials, Gen Zs. I also have the ability to, and I've got this already factored into the data, I just haven't run the crosstabs on each vote method, but I can also break it down by either generational or certain age categories if folks would find that of interest.
Yeah, I wish Shani was here.
And this may be something I can follow up with her and see
Yeah.
what her input and interest would be on that as well.
Well, the guess would be that more elderly folks use it since they have mobility issues. That would just be a guess, but it'd be interesting to have that confirmed.
I mean, one thing I could do is just do what we call a histogram, a frequency distribution by age of it, and see, you know, where the bulk of absentee by mail versus absentee in person versus election day. I can easily do those age distributions, and that would at least give you a sense of tends to skew older, tends to skew younger, tends to be a nice bell curve or something.
Yeah, I could see younger people wanting it because they're busy. Like, I mean, I don't have time like in the middle of my day always to go and vote. But retired people do.
Yeah.
Well, on the other end, there are more and more people in assisted living and in these facilities who don't drive, who can't go anywhere without a caregiver going with them. And, you know, the only way they really can vote is absentee by mail.
Let me do those, at least the age distribution graphs, and I'll send them out to folks. May just be one more data point, but it might be of something of interest.
Dr. Bitzer, I don't want to misrepresent what you said on the graph on absentee by mail vote, but I mean, it sounded like you were purposely nimble in your characterization of that, and to me, and again, I apologize for missing out on some of the discussions that Nadine has highlighted over the last couple of sessions, but you know, to me, it's a relative confidence issue in that method between, you know, stark difference between the different parties, particularly over the last couple of voting cycles. And it really gets to what's out there in the information space and the headwinds that is generating in one particular party. And I don't know how you counter that in imbuing confidence in voters writ large, but in particular in the Republican Party going forward. I mean, I'm posing a problem without a real good recommendation for a way ahead, but it just, struck me when you were talking to that particular slide, how stark those two trajectories are.
Yes, and let me try and be nimble again, but very candid in some thoughts from particularly 2020. When then President Trump was decrying vote by mail or mail-in ballots, he made it a very clear platform issue. He did not like people voting by mail, thought everybody should vote in person. And he came to North Carolina and said, you know, make sure to show up to vote and even vote by mail if you can. And it caught me as kind of what is the issue at hand? What is the concern? Because I knew the past data, and if you go back even before 2012, it was clear majorities. Over 50% of the mail-in ballots came from registered Republicans. And so I was trying to reconcile what he was saying in terms of decrying vote by mail and supporting vote by mail. And what I came to the conclusion was, for folks who request an absentee by mail ballot, and that's what you have to do in North Carolina, you have to submit a request for an absentee by mail ballot, and then it gets sent to you. That's okay. Where I think he was going with was, and this is the case in a lot of states, all voters get an absentee by mail ballot. If you are on the voter roll, you get an absentee by mail ballot. And you can either return it by mail or you can take it in person and deposit it at an early voting site or whatever. And I think where he was decrying vote by mail was it just getting blanketed sent out to everybody, and therefore anybody in that regard. And it took me several months to kind of reconcile where he was coming from. But I think, you know, and realistically, going from 2016 to 2018 with 40% registered Republicans down to 27%, something happened between those two election cycles. And I don't know what that is, but something happened in terms of the confidence by Republicans. And conversely, going from 31% registered Democrats in 2016 to 10 points more, 41%, there was something there as well. And then, you know, the natural decline from 27% in 2018 down to 21 in 2020, you know, that to me, voters take cues from their party nominees, their party leaders. And that certainly I would contribute to it, but it's a pretty stark dynamic at play within this just one graph. And I think from my perspective, as in terms of public education from this commission, this is something people need to be aware of. This is something that, you know, it is not a normal trend, but it has been something that we have seen a very distinct reversal on. And I hope I was nimble enough in terms of answering that and just sharing. I mean, it took me months to figure out, what is he talking about? And I think where it finally clicked in for me, he made some comment about, yeah, if you request an absentee by mail ballot, that's great. But if states are just sending them out, you know, willy-nilly, quote unquote, that's where the issue became.
Well, and what's interesting is that there are states that are mostly all mail voting.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if your committee is looking at, other states and how they do it, and is it, possibly a better way, but there are 8 states that allow all elections to be conducted entirely by mail.
Bill in our group, he actually did like a deep dive on Oregon, and he had a connection that
Cool.
he followed up with about Oregon.
Cool.
It's too bad he's not here.
Yeah, and a lot of the others they do it for small elections, like, I guess that would be a money saver, right? Low turnout, do it all by mail. But yeah, it'd be good to look at Oregon. I mean,
I
yeah,
get,
yeah.
oh, sorry. I guess we've had some pretty, I guess, like heated discussions. Maybe not heated is not the best way, but like passionate, I don't know, discussions about drop boxes, and I guess there's some disagreements in our group about the actual number of fraud, like that result, the actual counts of fraud that it seems like we have different
Mm.
beliefs about how secure ballots are, and that's where we have a lot of disagreement within the group about just how secure things are in like
Mm.
the idea of drop boxes. Like as a professor, I'm like, it would be really nice to have a drop box on campus where the students can just drop off their ballots or whatever. But some other group members are concerned that those can get stolen, or the drop boxes themselves can be destroyed or damaged, or how can they be surveilled, or I don't know. So we've had a lot of discussions, and I guess there's a county in North Carolina that has a Dropbox IRS document, like you can drop off your IRS, your tax documents or something. Becky, I guess, has some experience with that, where you can sort of like bypass mailing in your tax returns or something like that. It's not in New Hanover County, but we've had a lot of discussions about that and like the likelihood of fraud. And I think some of these narratives, we're having trouble sort of disentangling where the truth is, and where some of them are just like political narratives, and it's hard. It's a hard discussion to have. I mean, that's why this group exists, to have these hard discussions, but we've been having a particularly hard time navigating like, where is the truth? What is the actual data?
If I can speak to that, and I'm looking at an email that Becky Schmidt sent back in April with a number of questions that I hope the data that I've sent to you would cover. But she asked some of the questions about fraudulent ballots cast. I am pulling together some data that we know about this particular issue, and we'll get that information out to the group as well. One of the so the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank, has a publicly available database that they track issues of voter fraud or election fraud issues. And they break it out by states. And for North Carolina, this is one other spreadsheet that I'm working on that I need to, there it is. Within their database, going back to 1986, they have a documentation of 72 cases in North Carolina of issues of voter fraud, ballot fraud, of those. Now that goes back to 1986. What I'm also doing is, to the best of my ability, getting the number of ballots that were cast from 1986 to 2024. And basically from 2004, I've got State Board of Elections data that will give me the total number of ballots for all the elections in a particular year. I'm at this point where I've got close to 50 million ballots cast, 72, and this doesn't include 2016 to 2024. So this number will go up exponentially even from there. I'm at 0.0001 in terms of a percentage. And I think, 72 sounds like a lot. It is, but over the time period and in comparison to how many ballots were cast, it is, as we political scientists say when we are asked by reporters about voter fraud or ballot election issues, it is minuscule in terms of the actual data. We hear a lot about things. We know North Carolina has had that experience, both in 2018 in the North Carolina 9th, but also we had, I think the number was 19 cases of individuals who are not citizens seeking ballots, and they were caught and have been prosecuted for those as well. So I'm pulling what data and information I can to address Becky's questions from that email, and we'll get it out to folks as well.
Thank you.
Okay. I know we're at 2:00 and I promised we'd stay on time for that. Any other general questions or any other data comments that I can see about how I can slice and dice things?
Well, I guess I had a question about, I don't know what we're supposed to be, because I know we have to have the draft. I don't know what where each are like roles that we need to be, what we are supposed to be working on.
Let me get with Shawnee and see if we can get an email crafted. It may take another meeting for us to kind of get things finalized for our draft that'll be due in June.
Okay, great.
Just a reminder to everybody, the next meeting, July 15th. I think I'm right on that date.
That's the in-person one, July
In
15th.
person. Yeah.
You probably have a June meeting for the committee too, right?
Yes.
June 13th is that meeting.
Okay. So that'll be right before. We'll probably need to get, maybe do some email back and forth amongst the committee for language and start building the draft document. But if you need a hotel room to stay overnight here Sunday night, we've got a block of 25 rooms. We can certainly expand that if needed. But if you would let us know if
I have already.
Okay, great. Did you let Rachel know?
Yep, I will. Was she here? I think she was here.
Yes, yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, I would like to go. What night would be the hotel room?
Sunday night.
Sunday night. Okay.
Yep.
Yes, I would like to go.
Okay,
Very exciting.
excellent. All right.
Cool.
Thank you all for your time. Greatly appreciate it. And again, if you're thinking about this over the next week or so and thought, oh, I should have asked him if he can do this, just drop me an email and I'm happy to correspond and to work with what I can.
But I have to say, our committee, we've been getting to like the heart of like all the disagreements, and I think Shawnee's been on top of everything, and but we've been working hard, and I think the discussions we've had in the committee are pretty representative of like the hard discussions that are happening elsewhere.
Sure.
So, it's.
And I think one thing to think about is certainly at the July meeting, we'll have limited time, but I think if there is a tension or a point of disagreement within this committee or other committees, the commission as a whole needs to hear that, and others may have points of view or contributions to make, and certainly something that the whole commission, not just this singular group, could take on and deal with. And there may be minority reports written within each group. I mean, that's just how we're again building this airplane as we're flying. So
Well, there may be reports that just say our committee couldn't agree on a recommendation here.
yep, very much so.
I think
Yeah.
we might, I mean, I can't, Shawnee's our fearless leader, but I feel like there are some things that, these are hard questions that I don't know if there exists like a definitive recommendation. It's more of like we're giving it to the legislature, right? And
Or
that's at
public
the end of
opinion.
the day.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Inform the public.
Yeah, so I think maybe it is important to note that even we disagreed fundamentally on some things. It isn't that anyone is like wrong. It's just there's like disagreements that, that's just what happens in a democracy.
Yep, exactly.
Mm.
All right. If that's it, I appreciate everybody's time. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for all the slicing and dicing, Michael.
Anytime.
Yes. That's a lot of work.
Yeah,
In my
you're a master. You're a master.
Your spare time. Where do you have what spare time?
You know that spare time all too well.
Like at 3 a.m.
All right. Good to see everybody. Take care.
See ya.